Live from Washington, D.C., Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. And now, Chief Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, Sekulow.
So I get this alert that I have on my iPhone that lets me know when there's rockets being launched into Israel. And I will tell you, yesterday, that alert, the red alert it's called, you should download the app. It's a fascinating thing to watch. You understand what the Israelis are living with every day. Well, here's what happened. There was a series of these. Upwards of 300 rockets came in yesterday. The militant group Hamas, which is controlling still most of the Gaza Strip, pledged to actually increase the attacks on Israel for, quote, its aggression. The threat from Hamas came as the Israeli military said it was carrying out a wide-scale strike on military targets throughout the Gaza Strip, and the Palestinians kept up their most intense rocket fire since 2014. Now, I've been in the region when that has happened. We have been there when that has happened. Stuart Roth is with me in our headquarters here in Washington, D.C. Stuart, we've experienced these rocket attacks firsthand.
You know where this money is coming from to propel these rockets? From Iran. That's why the Iran sanctions are so important, Jay. But yeah, we've been there numerous times. This is Israel's neighbor, unfortunately, who is devoted to destructing the state of Israel. They don't want peace. It's in their constitution. They want to destroy Israel. It's not about settlements. It's not about this. It's not about that. They really look at the entire Israel as being one big settlement that needs to be recharacterized to another Arab state.
Yeah, they want the destruction of Israel. They say that in the Hamas charter, by the way. It's as clear as you can be. Wes Smith is our senior military analyst, a colonel in the United States Army, retired. The reports are that it's actually 400 rockets or mortar bombs across the border from Gaza into Israel. This was after the Israelis carried out an attack on Hamas leadership, killing one of the Hamas leaders. What's your sense of this? And I'm going to give you some personal experience of being down in that actual region when that has happened.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. I had to turn off my red alert because it kept going off all night long, waking me up. But Hamas, of course, is a terrorist group. They are estimated to have over 20,000 rockets and mortars in their arsenal. And Stuart's right. They fired yesterday a laser-guided anti-tank round at an Israeli bus. That's the first time that's happened. They threatened at the same time that they were going to use more advanced projectiles, they call them, to bring about what they're saying is 1 million Zionists within range of their rockets. This laser-guided technology and this sophisticated guidance system that they're threatening to use is what we discovered 2 months ago that Iran was supplying both to Hamas and Hezbollah. So Iran's fingerprints are all over this. I think it's pretty disingenuous for Hamas to say that Israel started this by sending that undercover unit into the Gaza Strip. They went into the Gaza Strip because Hamas continues to stage violent demonstrations at the border. They continue to send incendiary kites into Israel, thousands of acres of land.
Hey, Wes, I think it's important for you to explain to our audience, because this is a new technique they utilize, these incendiary kites. These are basically a kite that then catches areas on fire. Explain to people what this is. Again, this is another aspect of warfare.
Yeah. It's very simple. It's easy to do, and they have flown literally hundreds of kites over into Israel. You wait till the wind direction is right. You put what basically is a Molotov cocktail kind of device on it with a very, very long cloth or string fuse, so that it takes a while for the actual fuse to get into the fuel, use gasoline or whatever, and then it explodes and the fuel spreads everywhere. And like I said, thousands of acres of land and several buildings in Israel have been destroyed by these kites. So Israel sent this unit into Gaza, this intelligence unit, undercover, because they're trying to stop this violence not only at the border, but that's spilling across into Israel. Hamas fired on the unit, and that's how this started. And it's pretty disingenuous for them to say, well, we'll stop this when Israel stops the aggression. The aggressors are Hamas.
I'm going to try to see if we can get David Benjamin and Rami Levy from our office in Jerusalem on in the next couple segments of the broadcast. So we'll be working on that. Let me tell you this. We're taking a break. When we come back, we're going to take more of your calls and more information. We're going to talk about the situation in Israel. What does it mean for the greater region? Also, what does it mean for the greater national and international security? But also, don't forget the matching challenge of the ACLJ. Any amount you donate to the ACLJ, we're getting a matching gift for you. Do that at aclj.org. Let me tell you what's great. We've got an office in Jerusalem that works on these issues right there in the region. Ministry of Presence, right there. An ACLJ office in Jerusalem. You can help support it, aclj.org.
It is a critical time for our nation, and the American Center for Law and Justice is on the front lines, defending life and liberty, engaging the issues that matter most to you and your family. Whether it's working to protect Americans from the dangers of radical Islam and the persecution of Christians, to defending life at the U.S. Supreme Court, to protecting your religious and constitutional freedoms, we could not do this work without you, without your support. And now your support can really make a tremendous difference. For a limited time, you can participate in the ACLJ Matching Challenge. If you make a gift now, it will be doubled. $25 becomes $50. A $100 gift becomes $200. Please stand with the ACLJ right now and call 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255, or go online at aclj.org. Thank you for your support.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu convened a security cabinet meeting today to discuss the situation after cutting short his visit to Paris to return for emergency talks. Meanwhile, the U.S. envoy to the Middle East, Jason Greenblatt, weighed in on the clashes, saying the U.S. stands with Israel as it defends itself from Hamas. Quote, this is what Greenblatt said in a tweet, "The world is fed up with Hamas violence and the violence of other actors in Gaza." The fact of the matter is that this is their modus operandi. These, you talked about incendiary kites. We talk about these bombs. By the way, one 40-year-old man was killed, a civilian. Right. This is what happens. I've been there. When they are coming in, you have 14 seconds to get into a shelter. Jordan and a couple of our colleagues were actually outside of the shelter because they were not able to get in the shelter in time in that 14-second period. And mortar landed about 40 yards away from them. A shell came in. So they experienced it firsthand. So this is real. But then the idea that Israel doesn't get to defend itself is absurd.
Well, Jay, I mean, these mortar attacks, are coming in monthly. I mean, they increase in size over certain periods of the year, and we see a constant barrage from Gaza. But the other issue that we have to discuss is this humanitarian crisis in Gaza. 1.5 million Palestinians are suffering at the hands of the leadership. Also, the Egyptians, they classify Hamas as a terrorist group. Yep. So on both sides of Gaza, there are problems. And there are problems with the leadership that is supported by Iran. And I think, again, we have to tie everything back to Iran because there are embargoes on Gaza. And they're getting weapons, they're getting arms, they're getting cash, and they're getting it from Iran. If you cut off Iran, you're going to cut off a lot of the issues here in Gaza.
Wes, we know this, that one of the probably the main factor for funding is the Iranians. I mean, there's no doubt about it. They are the largest state sponsor of terror. They support Hamas. They support Hezbollah in the north. But the fact is that they are, even with their economic sanctions in place and even with their economy hurting, the truth is, Wes, that as it stands right now, money flows out of Iran to Hamas, or these rockets themselves are developed in Iran.
Right. I was about to say that it's not just cash that's going there, but they are supplying weapons and technology. This advent of a laser-guided projectile that happened just in the last 24 hours, that has the potential, Jay, to be a game changer with the terror groups who attack Israel. Because up until now, the rockets and even the missiles that Hezbollah has fired they're not guided. They're sort of lobbed in, and you hope that you might hit something. Iran providing them with guidance systems and with laser-guided anti-tank projectiles, that puts Israel in a new increased area of danger because of that. Iran's fingerprints are all over this. There is a reason why they are the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism. There's a reason why President Trump pulled out of that flawed agreement.
Well, and the point that Wes brought up is excellent, because on the other side of Israel, in Lebanon, we have Hezbollah that has hundreds of thousands of missiles. And again, the technology from Iran has increased significantly. So once upon a time, they were lobbing missiles into Israel from Gaza or from Lebanon, but they were missing great vast of people because they weren't sophisticated weapons. Now the weapons are sophisticated, and they are a real threat to Israel's sovereignty, to Israel's existence.
I think the other thing you have to consider here is what will happen after this conflict. The Palestinians will immediately run to the International Criminal Court in The Hague and file war crime complaints against the state of Israel. Meanwhile, they're flying incendiary devices on a kite over to civilian territories and killing civilians. So you ask yourself, Wes, I mean, listen, we're one of the few groups in the world that have actually litigated a case in front of the International Criminal Court in The Hague. So a lot of people can talk about it, but we actually were counsel in a case which actually had what they called a NGO roundtable, where we made oral arguments before all of these international lawyers, the Office of the Prosecutor for the International Criminal Court. I did those oral arguments with 3 other lawyers on our side, representing the interests of Israel, and 4 other lawyers representing the interests of the Palestinians. So a lot of people can talk about this, but there's few people that could say they actually did it, and we have. Now, what we know, and our team in Jerusalem working with our team in Virginia is doing right now at Regent University, they're putting together those briefs because we know for a fact that as soon as this tension calms down, which it does, these things become very cyclical, that we will now be faced with a challenge at the ICC.
Well, there's no doubt, because the way that the Palestinians, especially in Gaza, fight their wars is that they lob these missiles from hospitals, mosques, schools. So when Israel takes out these military bases, they're taking out civilians. And it is unfortunately the collateral, but the collateral is caused by the Hamas using citizens as human shields. So then they run to the International Criminal Court and say crimes against humanity, war crimes. And we know it's been documented, Jay, how they fight their warfare. And they do this to provoke the court from looking into these humanitarian crises caused by the war that Hamas instigated.
So more than 1 rocket per minute had been fired from Gaza into Israel over the course of 2 hours. This is the reports of the IDF spokesman. Now, Wes, you've been in battle zones, and I've been in when these rockets have coming in. Let's explain to people what it would look like and sound like. We'll talk about what the Iron Dome does. When you have basically a rocket per minute being fired from Gaza into Israel. Every minute, a rocket being fired.
Yeah, I've been on deployments, combat deployments, where missiles were fired at the unit that I was in. It is frightening. I can't imagine one rocket fired per minute. It is really terrorizing. When the alarms go off, you know that a projectile, a missile or rocket is in the air. What you do not know is whether or not it's going to land where you are. And it's very, very frightening. You know, Hamas, Jay, they really don't want peace. This all happened, this whole incident that flared up with them attacking the undercover unit on Monday, happened as Egypt and the United Nations and Israel were working together, trying to come up with a permanent peace and trying to get Hamas to stop launching projectiles across the border. This all happened right after the UN and Egypt and Israel were talking, and right after Qatar gave Hamas $15 million in humanitarian aid. They absolutely do not want peace. And Stuart's right. Their modus operandi is to use civilian areas for their weapons. And this latest thing, I was proud of the Israeli Defense Forces because they were very careful, not only as to the type of weapons they were using, but the time of their attacks, because Hamas routinely puts missile batteries in civilian locations, hospital, schools.
Right.
In this latest battle, Jay, their ammunition warehouse was housed with a kindergarten. And so Israel...
Say that again, Wes. I think it's very, very important. Say that again.
Yeah. In this latest round of attacks, Israel discovered that their ammunition warehouse for this latest battle was housed with a kindergarten. And I give Israeli Defense Forces credit. They were very careful in how they launched this attack, trying to minimize casualties. And they did that by the type of weapons they were using. And also, for example, with the kindergarten, attacking at night when they knew that children and students weren't there.
So let me play for you some sound from Fox News, because as I told you, it's exactly what I predicted would happen. Barrage of rockets, then a ceasefire, then a challenge at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. We call that lawfare. Here's what Fox News said.
All of this as Egyptian negotiators are scheduled to come to the region tomorrow in an effort to bring Hamas and the Israelis back to the table and try to develop some sort of ceasefire agreement that could reduce some of the violence that has been erupting in the region.
So let me tell you two things. Number one, Egypt doesn't want Hamas there any more than the Israelis do. I mean, the Israelis in Egypt, believe it or not, but it is true, are allies, very close allies on this. So they don't want them there, number one. Number two, there's a pattern here. Let me lay out that pattern for you. Attack with missiles, Israeli response, ceasefire, challenge at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. When I'm telling you, those of you that support the work of the ACLJ, you allow us to engage this. Where? Right in Jerusalem. We've got an office right in the heart of Jerusalem. Literally blocks away from the wall, from the Temple Mount, is the offices of the American Center for Law and Justice, Jerusalem, staffed by professionals, including government affairs professionals and lawyers. Our senior lawyer there, David Benjamin, who may well be out on, they may have called him up on reserves. I know they're trying to get him. It may well be on reserves because he does a lot of the international law of armed conflict. David is a soldier and a lawyer and works with us. And we are fortunate to have him. Rami Levy heads up our entire government affairs operations there. So this is both a diplomatic issue and a legal issue, and your American Center for Law and Justice is front and center in all of it. Your American Center for Law and Justice isn't just talking about the news. We are in the news. We are the ones that are going to court to defend Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, to push back on these attempts by these organizations who can be very aggressive to delegitimize the state of Israel. And that's what they utilize the courts for, to delegitimize the Jewish state.
Well, Israel, Jay, is always under persecution. Their existence is always being threatened from one border or the other border. And a substantial part of our practice is defending the rights of this, the only democracy in a very, very bad neighborhood. If you look at the countries surrounding Israel, this is not a good neighborhood, as they say. So we are there. We're in courts all over the world defending the existence of the state of Israel.
And we could do that because of your support to the American Center for Law and Justice. Let me encourage you to do something. In November and December, two biggest months of the year, matching challenge campaigns. That means any amount you donate to the ACLJ, we're getting a matching gift for us. Let me ask you to do something. Go over to aclj.org right now. Make an online gift. It could be $10, $20, whatever it is. If it's 20, it's 40. If you donate 50, we get a match for 50, makes it 100. So it's very good for us, very good for you. It's tax deductible. ACLJ.org. That's aclj.org. Back with the last segment in just a moment.
It is a critical time for our nation, and the American Center for Law and Justice is on the front lines, defending life and liberty, engaging the issues that matter most to you and your family. Whether it's working to protect Americans from the dangers of radical Islam and the persecution of Christians, to defending life at the U.S. Supreme Court, to protecting your religious and constitutional freedoms, we could not do this work without you, without your support. And now your support can really make a tremendous difference. For a limited time, you can participate in the ACLJ Matching Challenge. If you make a gift now, it will be doubled. $25 becomes $50. A $100 gift becomes $200. Please stand with the ACLJ right now and call 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255, or go online at aclj.org. Thank you for your support.
So the reports are that 400 rockets landed in Israel in the last 24 hours. I have this thing called Red Alert. I've talked about it before. If it goes off today, I'm going to have it play for you if it goes off while we're on air. Right now it's a quiet time. That means they're reloading. That's what it usually means. One of the situations is that the Israelis took out a broadcasting headquarters. Of course, the Palestinian Authority said bombing our headquarters for broadcasting is a crime and will not deter us from our pioneering role in conveying the truth. This is about their broadcast station. The truth of the matter is that it airs programs and music videos designed to recruit children to become Hamas armed fighters and suicide bombers. The Treasury, this is our government speaking here, said will not distinguish between a business financed and controlled by a terrorist group, such as Al-Aqsa Television, and the terrorist group itself. So the fact that they are engaged in the business of broadcasting for their propaganda doesn't mean they're all of a sudden now off limits.
What nation, Jay, would tolerate 400 missiles being fired into their country at civilians? None. So when Israel fights back, and Israel is so tolerant, and you could see by the fact that there actually is a Gaza, but there is a territory there with people in it after they've been doing this for decade after decade that the Israelis haven't leveled the entire state. So Israel is very, very tolerant. But when they do fight back, they end up in the International Criminal Court. They end up with international criticism for fighting back against Gaza, firing 400 missiles. Who would tolerate that?
Nobody would. But let me read something for you. So this is a Twitter feed from one of the directors of AXA TV. And they quoted a spokesman for Hamas, Al-Qassam, the Al-Qassam military wing, and the guy's name is Abu Abidiyah. This is what he said. If the enemy persists in aggression, the resistance factions will, and these are quotes, expand the circle of fire, and about 1 million Zionists, that's what they call the Jews living in Israel, will be waiting to enter the circle of our missiles. That's the threat, Wes, from the broadcasters of Alaska TV.
Right, yeah. There's a reason why the European Union has forbidden ACLJ TV to beam their programs into Europe anymore. They were doing that for years and years. They're no longer allowed to do that. There's a reason that the U.S. Treasury Department has sanctioned this TV station and anyone who does business with them. Can you imagine, Jay, this television station, they have children's programming. Think of the children's programming in America like Sesame Street. This television station has children's programming where they encourage children to grow up to be suicide martyrs for the cause of Hamas. It's just unconscionable.
Let me read for you, our audience. This is off there. So they're all upset about the fact that the Israelis took out this broadcast station, which was basically promulgating the terrorism, which is a legal, lawful target. And this is what their children, they say, but this was for children's programming. Here's the children's programming. It's a kid show hosted by a young boy, and he's told to recite a poem which reads that he said he learned from his mother. He said, "My mother taught me this poem." The boy recites, "O Jerusalem, I shall redeem you with my soul and my blood. I shall liberate you from the Jews by any means of the Al-Aqsa Brigade." That's their military. "Of course. I bring glad tidings to our prisoners. Salvation is near. May Allah grant long life to such a mother," says the host. So let me read you that again. "O Jerusalem, I shall redeem you with my soul and my blood. I shall liberate you from the Jews by the means of the Al-Qassam brigades. I bring glad tidings to our prisoners. Salvation is near. May Allah grant long life to my mother." That's what the poem said. This is not children's programming. This is children becoming suicide bombers, which unfortunately, Stuart, we've seen time and time again. And talking about a violation of international law of war and armed conflict, there it is. Does anybody hold the Palestinian Authority? Whenever we raise those issues, the ICC does nothing.
And that's why there's an embargo on territories like Gaza. And our administration right here, we're really fortunate because they understand that. And so we should really start instituting broader sanctions, Jay, on all the countries that are pouring money into Gaza. And then they say it's for humanitarian aid, but the truth is these are the purposes for which it goes to.
Well, here's the rest of the poem.
Okay.
The host asks another young boy a question about what do you want to be when you grow up? An engineer, he replies. The host then says, "An engineer? Why do you want to become an engineer?" "So that I can blow up Jews."
Right.
That's what the young boy said. So, yes, they took that operation out of existence, the Israelis, and it's called defense. And it's called dealing with the fact that this is what's causing the problem. And, Wes, I think that, we look at that. We always say that when you're dealing with the Middle East, you got to think nine-dimensionally. But what I wanted to do on this 30 minutes of the broadcast today was to go through this so you knew exactly, our audience knows exactly what's going on here. It's not just it's not a firecracker being launched over to Israel. These are real rockets. Now they're guided. They weren't before. These incendiary kites, which, again, Wes, I want you to explain. Those are two new tactics, guided missilery and incendiary kites. Explain both.
Yeah, the guided missile part is the most frightening and the most game-changing development in all of this, because before now, the missiles and rockets that Hezbollah and Hamas had were not guided. You fire them up in the general direction, hope they hit something. With this sophisticated guided missile system provided by Iran, it changes. They can actually target specific neighborhoods, specific buildings. And then the kites are rigged up with a time delay incendiary device, much like a Molotov cocktail. Thousands of acres of Israeli land and buildings have been destroyed by these kites. There's almost no way to defend against them. And think about it, Jay, and Stuart was right. What would we do if we had an enemy on our border that was firing rockets into the United States, that was burning thousands of acres of U.S. land? We would we would take a much stronger, more tough stand than Israel has taken, to be sure. And they talk about how Israel has closed the border with Gaza. Egypt has closed the border also because they also are fearful and do not support what Hamas is doing in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, the problem, of course, is that they continue. They puts all of these governments in a very awkward and uncomfortable position.
Well, geopolitical consequences of this, Jay, are significant. Of course, Egypt, they look at Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood as terrorist organizations. The Saudis do. Turkey, for some reason, our friend Erdogan in Turkey, he embraces Hamas for some reason, but there's all sorts of puzzle pieces moving around in that area. But Hamas is a destabilizing force. They're going to bring on something very, very brutal in response one day from Israel with all of these laser-guided missiles that are going to inflict one day, I think, serious injury on Israelis. And the Israelis are going to have no choice but to do some significant damage. And again, there'll be more humanitarian crises in Gaza, and they will blame Israel, and the photographers will be there taking pictures, but it'll all be self-inflicted by Hamas.
So let me go to this last thing with you, Wes. Again, when you've been in the region, Stuart and I have been in the region a lot. We have an office in Jerusalem. Tell people in just 30 seconds what it's like living under the threat and the reality of this kind of attack.
Yeah, it's almost unimaginable, and to the average American, they cannot imagine it. Having been in war zones where people were firing missiles and rockets at us, you live in this constant trepidation. You worry about your children going to school, about going outside to play, about simple things like going shopping. They do have bomb shelters all over the place, but you can't always get to them. It is truly a terror weapon being used by a terrorist organization.
And here's the thing I want to let you know. Our American Center for Law and Justice office in Jerusalem is right in the heart of this and right in the heat of the battle. Our lawyers and our government affairs team there are the best in the region. And as I say, we don't just talk about it here. We do it. We're in court, where it's called lawfare, where our lawyers are engaged on international law of armed conflict. Skip Ash couldn't be with us today, and is an expert in that area. David Benjamin, of course, is as well. Rami Levy, our Director General, who's former ambassador. I mean, we have a top team. Your support of the ACLJ makes all of that possible. Let me ask you to do something. We're in a matching challenge for November. It's a big month, second biggest month of the year. Go to aclj.org. If you want to stand with us as we stand with Israel, aclj.org. Any amount you donate, we're getting a matching gift for, so we encourage you to do that, again, at aclj.org. Have a great day.
It is a critical time for our nation, and the American Center for Law and Justice is on the front lines, defending life and liberty, engaging the issues that matter most to you and your family. Whether it's working to protect Americans from the dangers of radical Islam and the persecution of Christians, to defending life at the U.S. Supreme Court, to protecting your religious and constitutional freedoms, we could not do this work without you, without your support. And now your support can really make a tremendous difference. For a limited time, you can participate in the ACLJ Matching Challenge. If you make a gift now, it will be doubled. $25 becomes $50. A $100 gift becomes $200. Please stand with the ACLJ right now and call 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255, or go online at aclj.org. Thank you for your support.